In this lecture, I'm going to talk about snapping. Snapping is a way for you to perfectly align your actors with one another within your level, and there are several ways of doing this. The first method involves using the end key. If you have an actor selected, and you press the end key, it will snap that actor directly into the nearest surface. This is immensely useful for aligning objects, especially for getting your actors to sit directly on the floor or some surface. Another way of using snapping is called surface snapping. If you go up and click on this icon here, it will display a small pop-up where you can turn on surface snapping. With surface snapping on, if you use the translation widget to move an actor around in 3 dimensions, anytime you get close to the surface of another actor, it will snap the selected actor to the surface of the nearby actor. Note that this only works when moving the object in 3 dimensions. It doesn't work when moving actors around in just 1 or 2 dimensions at a time. In other words, you need to be dragging the actor around by the white sphere in the middle for surface snapping to work. Alright, so surface snapping has a couple of settings you can adjust to change how it behaves. The first setting is called Rotate to Surface Normal, and it is set to on by default. So what does this do? Well, let's say my chair was rotated a bit, like this, so that its bottom surface was no longer in alignment with the surface of the floor. If I have surface snapping on, but I have rotate to surface normal off, when my chair gets close to the floor, it will snap to the floor, but it will keep my chair at the same rotation it was without attempting to rotate it to align with the floor. However, with rotate to surface normal on, when the chair snaps to the floor, it will also be rotated so that its bottom surface is perfectly aligned with the surface of the floor. And the second setting of surface snapping that you can adjust is the surface offset. This tells the editor how far away the surfaces of the 2 actors should be when they snap together. So far, this setting has been at 0, so my actors were snapping directly to the surface. However, let's say I wanted all my actors hovering slightly off the floor the same amount. I could enter a surface offset of, say, 20, and now all my actors will snap exactly 20 centimeters above the floor. Okay, so what if you need to align 2 actors with each other precisely? For example, imagine these 2 cylinders were pipes that needed to be fitted together exactly. The best way to achieve this is to use vertex snapping. To use vertex snapping, when you are moving an actor using the translation widget, simply press and hold the V key, and when you are close enough to another actor, you will see several blue dots appear on the actor. Each of these blue dots is a vertex of the actor that can be snapped to. So when you get close to one of these blue dots, the pivot of the first actor will snap to the vertex of the second actor. Okay, but this doesn't really help us too much right now because the pivot is located at the center of the actor. But if you remember from the previous lecture, the pivot can be temporarily moved using the middle mouse button. So what I'd like to do is to move the pivot to one of the vertices of this actor. But remember, we're looking for exact precision here, and just moving the pivot around like this isn't precise. Luckily, there is a way to do vertex snapping when setting the pivot. So with the middle mouse button still being held down, I'm going to hold down Alt plus V, and now I will be able to snap the pivot to one of the vertices of this actor. Alright, so now with the pivot set there, I'm going to left click on the widget again in order to move the entire actor. Then I'm going to press the V key and I'm going to snap these 2 actors together, vertex to vertex, so that they line up precisely. Okay, so as you can see, it is now a perfect fit. You can also align objects by using grid snapping. While surface snapping and vertex snapping are useful for aligning objects so they directly touch each other, grid snapping is useful for aligning objects across distances. So if I click this icon here, it will toggle grid snapping on and off. With grid snapping on, as I move my actor, I will only be able to move it in the increments that the grid is divided into. So as you can see here, as I move my chair left and right, the chair snaps to each line of the grid, and I can't move the chair a smaller amount than that. If I turn grid snapping off, however, now I can move the chair any distance I like. Now, if I go up to this box here, I can adjust what is called snap sizes. This will change the number of units that the actor can move at a time. Right now it is set at 10, meaning this chair is moving in increments of 10 units at a time. So now you may be wondering, if it's supposed to be moving 10 units at a time, why is it snapping to each individual line on the grid? So the answer to that is that the number of lines visible on the grid at any given time is dependent on the snap size that is set. So because it is set at 10 right now, the grid is actually only displaying 1 out of every 10 lines it actually contains. If we change the snap size to 1, now we can see every line on the grid. And also you can see that the chair will now move only one unit at a time, whereas before it was moving 10 of these units at a time. So regarding grid units, one very important fact you need to be aware of is that one grid unit in the Unreal Editor is meant to represent 1 centimeter in the real world. So whenever you see a number in the Unreal Editor meant to represent a unit of distance, you can think of that number in centimeters. So when we adjusted the surface offset by 20 units earlier, that made our actors hover 20 centimeters above the floor. When our snap size is set to 10, it means we are moving our actors 10 centimeters at a time, and so on. So just like with the translation widget, you can turn snapping on or off for the rotation widget, and you can do so by clicking on this icon here. With snapping on, you can rotate your actors in specific increments along a rotation grid, with those increments being measured in degrees. So the Unreal Editor measures distances in centimeters, and it measures rotation in degrees. You can also choose how many degrees the actor should rotate each time. So right now I have this set to 10. So when I rotate this chair, it will rotate in increments of 10 degrees. And notice that it tells me how many degrees I've rotated so far in either direction. But by clicking on this icon here, I can change the amount of degrees it will rotate by. Or I can turn rotation snapping off and rotate the chair freely. And just like with move and rotate, you can toggle scale snapping on or off by clicking on this icon here. And you can change the increment amount here. And the way increments work with the scaling widget is by a multiplier. So right now I have 0.25 selected, which means if I increment this chair one size larger, its size will increase by 0.25 times its current size. In other words, its size will increase by 25%. If I make it smaller, it will decrease by 25% at a time. If I were to change this to 0.5, it would now increase or decrease in increments of 50%, and so on. And if I turn scale snapping off, I can now increase or decrease the size freely. And that will conclude the lecture on snapping.